Thank you very much for being here today. This project is one that started a year before I was admitted to this PhD program and has consumed my thoughts and time for the better part of 6 years. I'm grateful for the chance to share it with you all today. There are some women whose names always bring to mind images of fashion and glamour, but some women transcend the pages of fashion magazines. Their images seem more relatable somehow. It's not just the woman who is iconic, but her outfits have achieved iconic status. One cannot see a pink suit and not think, however fleetingly, of Jacqueline Kennedy. A full white wedding gown with lace and frills and puffed sleeves usually calls to mind a young Princess Diana arriving at St. Paul's Cathedral. These images live on long after the woman herself, and these images continue to influence future generations of women and their clothing choices. This study examines Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, Diana, Princess of Wales, Michelle Obama, and Catherine, the Duchess of Cambridge, their iconic stateswoman style, and the ways their style constructs their identity and gives them agency. 2 points of clarification. In an effort to avoid confusion by using similar titles and referring to them by a last name that either assumes their identity under their husband or back to their father, I will be referring to each by her first name in a desire to be as respectful as possible. Also, for this analysis, I'm defining stateswoman as any woman in an official public role who does not also hold some form of political power, but rather is connected to the public role through marriage or birth. I see clothing and fashionable dress as a positive aspect of creativity and cultural production. As a feminist, I also follow the example of Susan Kaiser, who explains, quote, "Studying fashion is a both and rather than an either or activity. Fashion thrives on contradictions, conflicting truth claims, and ambivalence, conflicting emotions, both and ways of knowing and feeling. Combining fashion and feminist cultural perspectives encourages thinking that disrupts, blurs, and transcends binary either-or oppositions," end quote. By taking an interdisciplinary and feminist approach to my selected stateswomen, I am open to the feminist critiques against the fashion system while still being open to the ways that dress operates in our everyday lives and how dress as a material object helps to construct our identity. This project is guided by 3 research questions. First, how did or do these women navigate and shape their identities through the fashion choices they make as stateswomen? Second, how have they used clothing to create a public identity while working within the constraints of their stateswoman roles? Third, what, if any, influence do past stately and past royal icons have on current icons in the making? Dress is a powerful tool of expression and identity creation. When we look at stateswoman style, we see the ways that dress gives them a power to negotiate the official identity that's being placed on them. I argue for the ways the selected women in this analysis embrace, challenge, and/or subvert the stateswoman role they are expected to play and the values their roles reflect on the national stage. Dress becomes one of the few material practices women can use to challenge traditional roles. Style is a nonverbal rhetoric that can be used to either embrace the status quo or resist it, and gives voice to women who might not otherwise have a voice or a platform to express their personal values and beliefs. I argue these women aren't just fashion icons, women whose clothing is passively consumed. They are significant fashion influencers whose style is replicated either directly through the purchase of the exact item or indirectly through the purchase of similar or inspired pieces. By understanding the way these women influence the clothing behavior and wardrobe choices of the average consumer, we can better understand the deeper ways clothing impacts our daily lives. To help me create a theoretical framework for my analysis, I use the work of 3 scholars. I am drawn to the work of style scholar Barry Brummett, particularly his book, A Rhetoric of Style. Through the choice of print, color, cut, and embellishment, as well as the combination of accessories, what we wear has vast possibilities to make numerous statements about our identity, our personality, and how much we do or don't conform to social expectations. I also lean on Elizabeth Wilson's book, Adorned in Dreams, Fashion and Modernity. While Brummett explores the way that style can be used for persuasive effect, Wilson identifies the ways that dress has the power to create identity or subvert it. I cannot deny the many and varied critiques of fashion and the fashion industry by feminist scholars. According to Wilson, fashion scholarship tends to focus on fashion from the perspective of social history, psychology, or the economy. However, when we focus only on one of these perspectives, the results lead to simplistic explanations that only address one part of what fashion is. She suggests, quote, "We need a variety of takes on fashion if the reductive and normative moralism of the single sociological explanation is to be avoided while we yet seek to go beyond the pure description of the art historian," end quote. I envision this project as one such new take on fashion studies and material culture. Finally, the third work that I rely on is Colleen Denny's book, Representing Diana, Princess of Wales, Cultural Memory and Fairy Tales Revisited. What is of particular interest to me is the way that Denny argues that the cultural visual memory of previous royal women impacts Diana's representation. I argue the same could be said for the cultural visual memories of the other women I analyze. I then brought together a wide range of scholarship focused around three key themes: dress as object, dress and social identity, and agency in dress. This dissertation examines 4 case studies. So I've got Jacqueline Kennedy, and I analyzed the inauguration suit designed by Ola Cassini and the inaugural ball gown by Ethel Franco. Diana, Princess of Wales, I look at her wedding gown designed by the Emanuels and the black cocktail dress by Christina Stambolian that was dubbed by the press as the revenge dress. Michelle Obama's inauguration suit by Isabel Toledo and the inaugural ball gown by Jason Wu. And Catherine, Duchess of Cambridge, her wedding gown by Sarah Burton for Alexander McQueen, and then the net dress by the high street retailer Reese, worn in the official engagement photos, and then again several months later on the first world tour of Canada. The 2 I will be sharing today with you are Jacqueline's Cassini inauguration suit and Catherine's net dress. Jacqueline's ensemble for the inauguration ceremony included a hat, coat, dress, fur collar and muff, and both a pair of snow boots and pumps. The hat appears simple on the surface, but was a calculated choice by Jacqueline. She notoriously disliked hats and had been forced to adopt them during the campaign for a number of reasons. Her preference for bouffant hairstyles led her to her preference for pillbox hats. Comparatively small next to other popular styles of the day and also typically free from embellishments, they can blend in easily with the outfit. They also fit over a large hairstyle. As a result, she decided to wear her hats on every occasion, not just on Inauguration Day, tilted to the back of her head rather than straight across the top, as was usually the style. Throughout her White House years, she wore her hats off her face because covering the face created mystery, and she knew her role demanded visibility. The fur muff and collar was a discreet nod to the fur coats that many of the female guests were wearing and had been the inspiration of Diana Vreeland. Vreeland claims, quote, "It was only for practical reasons. I thought she was going to freeze to death. But I think muffs are so romantic because they have to do with history," end quote. Being an admirer of both style and history, Jacqueline would have no doubt been in agreement with Vreeland. Long gloves provided warmth as well as elegance, and being ivory kept with the lighter color of the main body of the coat and helped to further balance between the light and dark colors in the ensemble. Though only the coat is seen in the pictures, Cassini designed a matching dress. Jacqueline had a strong tendency to use suits as armor to hide and protect her body. Hamish Bull states that Jacqueline used her state clothing, quote, "as a shield and style as an effective weapon," end quote. Multiple times in her correspondence with associates at the time, Jacqueline mentions a desire to be covered up. Part of this desire to be covered was likely connected to a wish to appear modest and appropriately attired for the role she was serving in, but part of it was also related to the need to feel protected as Jacqueline struggled with the sudden loss of anonymity and the vast exposure she had on the international stage. The silhouette of the ensemble is simple and ultimately timeless, looking just as fresh now in 2018 as it did in 1961. It illustrated the youthful freshness of the Kennedy campaign, and the light grayish color also helped symbolize the hopeful optimism of the new administration. The light color stood out against the sea of dark wool overcoats and dark fur coats worn by the other attendees around Jacqueline. Though she struggled with being the center of attention throughout her tenure, she excelled at using her clothing as a tool to increase her visibility. Throughout the day, the light color would make her stand out from the crowd of dignitaries and make her more visible to the public who would come to watch. Color was also symbolic for Jacqueline. She considered white to be a ceremonial color, and all of her inauguration outfits were in a light grayish or ivory. White and ivory are also typically colors associated with brides and debutantes. And choosing this color for her inauguration suit, Jacqueline is, in a sense, establishing herself as First Lady in a ceremonial way through her clothing. She was knowledgeable of the history of the role of First Lady and would have been aware of the place of history she now held. Through her ensemble on the day, and as we can see in her correspondence with associates, Jacqueline was keenly aware of the role she would be playing, and her style would be a key part of her strategy in negotiating that role and the expectations of it. Already firmly established as queen of the high street before her wedding, it should have come as no surprise that Catherine would reach into her wardrobe for a high street dress to wear for her official engagement photographs. Catherine had already been very strategic about when and where she would wear designer pieces, and became even more strategic in these choices after the wedding. Hinting at wedding white, the soft ivory dress by high street retailer Reese was from a collection more than a year old. The dress, named Nanette, originally retailed for approximately £159. No doubt Catherine considered what outfit to wear for the photos very carefully, but the resulting effect of choosing an old high street dress gives a down-to-earth normality to the portrait. Almost immediately, interest in the dress skyrocketed, remaining stock online sold out instantly. The brand eventually re-released the dress and it sold out again. I argue that a major part of Catherine's appeal to the public is that she dresses as real people do. Unable to receive free clothes from designers the way celebrities do, and with a global recession and increased focus on the cost of the monarchy to taxpayers, members of the royal family have had to take a more practical and economical approach to their lifestyles. Catherine set a tone very early on that she was not going to be a frivolous fashion fanatic. She would make her use of what was already in her closet and would add to her wardrobe strategically and judiciously, something she continues to do to this day. But that wouldn't be the end of the Nanette dress. She would bring the dress out again several months later to a Canada Day citizenship ceremony in Quebec. This time she used the white dress as a canvas from which her bright and bold accessories were made even more obvious. With this look, we see her recycling an existing dress from her wardrobe, but combining it with more premium and designer pieces. With this being the first world tour for the newly married couple so soon after the wedding, and such a high-profile event, it would have been expected and acceptable if Catherine had purchased all new clothing and accessories. The appearance of the Nanette dress mixed in with the new and high-end pieces during the royal tour demonstrates her use of clothing as an extension of her personality and as a professional tool, rather than being the dress-up doll the media tries to make her out to be. Her clothing is beautiful, but first and foremost, it's functional and serves a purpose. The red and white combination nicely references and pays homage to the Canadian flag, and the two maple leaf items on her hat and the brooch that she was wearing reference a national symbol. This is one of Catherine's earliest examples of sartorial diplomacy, something she mastered on the Canadian tour. The ensemble she combined for the Canada Day appearance, along with the entire Canadian tour wardrobe, showed a young woman who knew herself and the identity she wanted to portray. Catherine had set her personal style from the outset and would adapt it when the needs of her role required it. Her personal style would be her stateswoman style, with little difference between the two. Through the combination of accessories, colors, and a mix of high-end and high street, as in the case of the Nanette dress, Catherine is negotiating and creating a new era of court dress for the British monarchy, one that is a blend of the old and the new. She is also crafting a new identity for herself, as we all do as we grow older, as a wife, mother, and royal, and along the way is creating a personal style that best represents herself and how she wishes to be perceived. In this last section, I'd like to discuss potential areas for extending the research begun in this study. There are a number of possibilities that I mentioned in the dissertation, but one relates to 3 women whose names came up during the course of conducting this research. While it wasn't right to insert them into the study, it would be wrong to exclude them entirely. These women are Hillary Clinton, Melania Trump, and Meghan Markle. Hillary poses a different perspective on this discussion, as she has been a first lady, a senator, and a presidential candidate. Melania is an immigrant to the U.S. from Slovenia, giving her a multinational perspective to public style. She is also a firm model and had a career in fashion before becoming a first lady. Meghan is an American actor and celebrity who is soon to be the wife of Prince Harry. Theirs will be the first major royal wedding since Catherine and William's. And while Catherine and Meghan share some similarities, there are also some significant differences that make Meghan worth watching and studying over the next several years. As I demonstrate throughout the analysis of these 4 women, clothing has power. It can give power or it can take power away from the wearer. Clothing is continuously functioning in various social circumstances, and combined with the social context, clothing can convey great meaning. The way clothing is interpreted by the individual wearing the garment, as well as by the public that receives the garment, is a combination of our own internalized social perception and our internal interpretation plus cultural interpretations. What makes these women special? Each of these women in this study seem to have possessed an innate sense of how the outfit would be read by the press and the public, as well as a keen understanding of the press and the feedback loop the press provided. They all made interesting and creative choices with the way they constructed an outfit, and those choices were always led by their individual style rather than by following trends. Each of these women, in a way, were reluctant fashion icons. Each of them wished to be known for something more than just the clothing that they wore. But they also understood that clothing was still an important part of the roles they performed, and that their official positions came with expectations for the way they would dress. They each learned how to challenge and negotiate a space for their individual styles within those expectations of their roles. These stateswomen icons show the public evolving negotiations between personal and public style and identity. They demonstrate the ways that clothing choices can be empowering ways to construct identity and use clothing as an identity statement. This is instrumental in helping average women of the public learn how they can use clothing as a rhetorical statement that creates agency and identity. Thank you very much for your time. I welcome your questions and comments.
So as by convention,
Identity, whether it's personal or public, is always in flux, in motion. It's always changing and evolving. I think what we tend to see more often that we don't realize is that we are seeing more of the personal style coming into the professional style or the public style. I think that's one of the reasons why we don't see Catherine wearing stuff straight off the runway, why it's always adapted to fit her personal needs more. We see the necklines being raised, the hemlines being lowered. It's just not quite as fashion forward. I've seen a number of times where Michelle has explained that first and foremost it has to be comfortable, because if she's not comfortable, she can't make the people around her comfortable. So we see those personal preferences creeping in, and that then kind of creates this public style that becomes known and more widely replicated. So it goes back and forth, and there are obviously times where we see them wearing something that probably is more of that official state identity, particularly in state functions, so state dinners, banquets, where they're wearing the real formal gowns. I can't imagine those are completely comfortable. Michelle and Catherine also have a strong tendency to use those occasions as sartorial diplomatic opportunities. So if the Italian Prime Minister was coming to the White House, Michelle would wear Versace or some Italian designer. So you see a move towards wearing something that might be outside of what they normally would wear as a way of referencing a state visit or a royal tour or something like that. So it goes back and forth. Yeah, the social media is definitely an interesting aspect of this, and the media will try to tweak and pull the audience in different directions. So one thing that I mentioned in the dissertation, we see a lot of comparisons between Catherine and Diana, but I would argue that Catherine is actually more similar to a young Queen Elizabeth than Princess Diana in her choices and just her style in general. But that's not a popular connection to make. They want to keep bringing up Diana's images and put them next to Catherine. I think social media and the press and just the rapidity of how quickly the images can get circulated. We see more of a focus on Michelle and Catherine than we did certainly on Jacqueline, and even to a certain extent with Diana. The paparazzi were definitely in full effect, but images couldn't get circulated quite as quickly as they do now. I often know that Catherine has made a new appearance because a picture pops up on Instagram before I see any official announcement of it. With social media, there's this really interesting play between what they might intend and how it gets perceived. And there's cultural knowledge there, and like one thing I mentioned in the presentation is that how a garment is read depends on our personal perceptions and our personal interpretations, but also cultural interpretations. So they could intend to mean one thing, but it could get picked up in different ways. So Catherine recently wore a floral dress to the unveiling of the new garden at Kensington Palace. And American press really picked up on, oh, she's wearing floral to a garden unveiling. Well, the floral print was actually poppies, and poppies have very strong cultural and historical significance to British and other European countries from World War I. So there's usually layers. There's like the top layer of how a garment can be perceived, like the revenge dress. You know, everyone kind of sees it as, oh, she's getting revenge. But when you look deeper and when you try to think about it from their perspectives, you can see multiple levels and layers of those meanings. And most of those would not be readily apparent to the audience. I mean, I feel like that gets back at the basic question of why is this research important? Why should we be studying clothing? Why does clothing matter? And it's one of the reasons why I changed the title to be more than a pretty dress. Because while on the surface it might look like it's just a dissertation looking at pretty women wearing pretty clothing, at the end of the day, what we wear does have deep meaning. And clothing behaviors and clothing choices, especially as you see it on the national, international stages with stateswomen, gives women a way of saying something about their personal beliefs and values that maybe sometimes contradicts their official or officially accepted beliefs and values. It allows them to have a little bit more fun, express more identity and personality in a public role that maybe sometimes tries to suppress that. And at the end of the day, it's kind of like a lot of the rhetoric work that I've been interested in as a feminist rhetoric scholar, where we're trying to uncover and bring into the light these smaller, less noticeable ways of making and meaning expression and identity making that women have that are not in traditionally accepted rhetorical spaces. So these women, if they give speeches, it's usually pre-written for them, and there's only a certain amount of wiggle room they have to make it sound like them. Catherine gets critiqued constantly for her public speeches, not just how she sounds, but also just what she's saying, and it doesn't sound authentic and it doesn't sound like it's from the heart. I'm not sure that's necessarily all her fault. I think there's people behind the scenes that are pulling those strings a little bit. So clothing becomes that one thing that's kind of theirs, that they have control over. And there's a number of research in the correspondence, in interviews, quotes from designers that have worked with these women that show that they have all played a very proactive role in deciding what they wear. Jacqueline pretty much told Cassini what she wanted for the suit and for the ball gown. Michelle works with various designers, but she has ultimate say-so and has emphasized in interviews that it's about what she feels comfortable in and what feels right to her, as well as who the designer is, what wearing that designer might say. She's pretty much established Jason Wu's career. He was very unknown prior to the inaugural ball gown, and now he's an internationally famous designer with amazing collections every season. Diana and Catherine have had assistants and people help them, but for the most part, that's more down to Catherine will just draw a lot of attention if she goes shopping, but if she sends out her personal assistant to do it, then her assistant is less recognizable and no one's really gonna make a fuss. But she's still kind of deciding what she's going to wear, and I found numerous instances with the sartorial diplomacy aspect of things, where she's being very, very strategic about what she wears. So while I understand the critiques that it might just be about dresses and it might be reinforcing stereotypes, I think you have to acknowledge that fashion does have power and it can give power to the wearer. And if we just dismiss fashion as being something that reifies those stereotypes, we're really missing out on some very interesting rhetorical activity that these women are doing. I kind of see that as a next direction for this project or a project like it, because three things that I didn't really get to dive into were race, class, and gender. And I think those are three aspects that are really important in this project. With Catherine, there was a huge conversation that kind of still persists to this day. Everyone loves her commoner background. She's really not that common, especially by American standards. By British standards, where there is more of that class hierarchy, I can kind of see it. She doesn't come from an aristocratic family, but she's not a commoner. And people tried to make the same argument about Diana, that Diana was a commoner at the time, even though she was a lady and daughter of an earl, but she wasn't a European princess, as was usually the practice for the Prince of Wales as a potential wife. So we see consistently class being brought up. And I think with Michelle and Catherine and their tendency to wear lower cost clothing, Michelle shops at Target. She will wear the high end, but she'll also wear stuff that, I as a grad student can afford. And Catherine kind of does the same thing. We see that blending of what almost any professional woman with a professional income would do. You strategically choose the higher end pieces that will last longer, and then the more fun, maybe more trendy, high street options that you spend less money on. I think that can be seen as them trying to have more of appeal to the mass public, to the lower socioeconomic members of the population. I think it's interesting that it gives their audience, their fans, if you will, an opportunity to look and dress like a princess, if you will, or like a first lady, to kind of emulate that style because they're not wearing brands that are completely inaccessible. Also today we've got more of that fast fashion market, and it's easy for high street retailers to replicate their higher end pieces. So Catherine's blue Issa dress that she wore to the engagement announcement was, I think, originally retailed for like £400, but within like a month Tesco had a version for like £50 or £100 or something. So the audience, the receivers of these dresses and these outfits want a piece of that. It's that idea of if we can have a piece of their style, we can maybe have a piece of their lives. And I feel like that's a whole other branch that this could go down that I didn't get to really explore. But yeah, class, race, and gender are three things that I think are really intertwined and that I didn't get to go down that road as much. But especially if I bring in Melania or Meghan Markle, because Meghan is biracial and has received a lot of racist backlash all around the world for being engaged to Prince Harry. I think that's something that really needs to get explored with these women. Yeah, so second question first, it's definitely morphed, but we do still see the references. Catherine's worn a couple of outfits. Most notably, there's a white suit with a pillbox hat, and then there's a red suit that she's worn, a skirt suit with a pillbox hat, that immediately the press was putting up pictures of her next to pictures of Jackie. There's also a suit that she wore to Poland, a blue Catherine Walker suit that was very reminiscent of kind of that Jackie style. Diana wore a pink Versace suit with a pillbox hat that looked almost like if they were designing Jacqueline's pink suit for the 1990s and Versace was reinterpreting it, that's what it would look like. I mean, it was obvious that she was trying to reference Jacqueline. It's morphed, but there's also ways, I think Michelle has more personality. I mean, just comparing the two first ladies, I think Michelle in a way is kind of redefining Jacqueline's stateswoman style for the 21st century. But there's still a lot of those kind of key basics in terms of the sartorial diplomacy, strategically wearing American designers. Both of them strongly championed American fashion, Michelle especially, but she kind of picked that up, that there are times when you wear local and domestic, and there are times we wear international. I think Michelle is more confident though, and so we see more of that confidence coming out, whereas Jacqueline was a bit more closed off and a bit more covered up. I think there's a lot of comparisons to be made between Jacqueline and all of them, but what we're seeing is where Jacqueline kind of fully embraced the traditions and the values and the expectations of her role, and partly due to personality and partly due to just the social constructs of the time period she was in, didn't push back as much. I mean, she did with the hats. She really did not like hats. But the Milliner Association was one of Kennedy's campaign contributors. So she kind of had to wear hats. Her personality was a bit more suppressed in her clothing, whereas when you look at Michelle's outfits, the details, the fabric, the texture, the jewelry, the accessories, we see her having more fun with her fashion. And so it's kind of Jackie 2.0 in a way. So that's kind of how I was seeing it throughout this project. Yeah, no, because I think taste and class often get lumped together, and I see a lot online, you know, oh, Catherine or Michelle, the way she dresses, it's so classy. And I feel like that word is so coded and means so many different things, which is why I feel like class, race, gender is the next thread that needs to get pulled on this. Taste and class are definitely very closely linked, often in very problematic ways. And I think that's why there is such an appeal with kind of the mass public when Michelle or Catherine wears something more high street, lower cost, something from Zara that, you know, I can go to the mall and pick up for less than $50. Because it allows people who have typically perhaps been lumped into that lower class genre to feel like they've got some of that access. I think taste, when we're talking about, you know, taste as personal preference, you know, they definitely all have their own tastes and their own ways that they want to dress. I do think the revenge dress is interesting because she never wore that dress or a dress quite like it again. Post-divorce, Diana definitely did wear more figure-conscious clothing and was definitely a bit more of that kind of celebrity glamour. But she never quite replicated this look, and I think it's because she was doing this for very strategic purposes and not because it was necessarily her taste or her preference. She was trying to send a very clear message, not just to her estranged husband, but to the palace, to the press, to everyone, that she was going to do her own thing and she was not going to be defined by other people's rules. So even though with that dress in particular, we could see it, and I can see the feminist critique of this being very sexualized and very objectified, it's still also something that the public can relate to. I mean, a lot of women know what it's like to have someone that we're trying to just send a message to, whether it's an ex or, you know, former frenemies at a high school reunion. You know, we've got those situations where we want to like go in and knock them dead. I think that's what she was doing, and it's a very real and human thing to do. So can we judge that as being anti-feminist or critique that as being anti-feminist? We can, but is that necessarily the right thing to do? So when I was doing the research, generally, you know, I didn't dive too deep into the feminist critiques, but what I was seeing by and large is just it's a form of oppression, it's women as chattel, and I would argue that absolutely in generations prior to Jacqueline, First Ladies, absolutely. I had a question at the Dress Historians Conference back in October, why did I choose Jacqueline and not Mamie Eisenhower? I don't think Mamie Eisenhower had as much sense of agency and clarity for how she wanted to portray herself. I think she was dressing as the typical First Lady, hostess of the White House. So I don't think my arguments would hold up with her. I think that's what we see with Jacqueline, is she's really kind of setting that bar and establishing that no, you as First Lady, do have a certain amount of power over how you're going to be portrayed. And we see the first ladies between Jacqueline and Michelle playing with that here and there, some better than others. But with Michelle, we kind of see that, like again, Jackie 2.0, kind of that style reborn and refreshed for the 21st century. The clothing as armor and protection and style as a weapon came up again and again. You know, there's that Hamish Bowles quote that I used in the presentation that Jackie used clothing as a shield and style as a weapon. The recent exhibition at Kensington Palace on Diana's clothing, frequently in the press releases for it and in the material around the exhibition, you know, talked about the ways that she used style as a weapon to kind of protect herself, but also how she was going to be portrayed. And we definitely see clothing as protection with with Michelle and Catherine. I think that's why Catherine gets a lot of flack from some designers and some of the fashion press for not pushing the boundaries of fashion, not being edgy enough in her fashion, not being as fashion forward as she could be, especially as someone who's essentially representing British fashion. But that's not her role as a stateswoman, to push the boundaries of fashion. And I think when you are in the public eye in the way she is, wearing clothing that is a bit safer and gives you that both literal and figurative covering allows you to focus on the work. Catherine and Diana have both been clear with the people that they've worked with. Obviously, I don't have any direct quotes from either of them about their style. But with the designers who've worked with them, Diana was very conscious about what message was she conveying with what she wore. And Catherine and Diana both don't want to be known as clothes horses. They both have wanted to be known as working women. Obviously, they're not working women in the same way as, you know, members of the public, and they do have an incredible amount of privilege and access. But we saw Diana in her post-divorce years, and Catherine already, especially since becoming a mother, her clothing has become a little bit more streamlined. Yeah, we definitely see, with Michelle, we see moments where it's kind of hinting at what lawyer Michelle was like and not First Lady Michelle. She does the corporate and kind of professional workwear really well. And she seems to know what event or appearance would benefit from that style versus when to dress more like Mother Michelle, you know, mother of two teenage daughters kind of a thing. Catherine, yeah, her off-duty style is definitely very casual. There's been a number of like paparazzi photos that show her like in very private backyard moments with the kids in jeans and a sweatshirt or a sweater, you know, just kind of chilling out, hanging out, hair just back in a ponytail, not perfectly styled. In her professional appearances, when they go on like family tours and the kids come along, it's still a bit more professional. She's still, I mean, I've seen her carry Charlotte down airplanes in like 4-inch heels, and I don't know how she does it. But what's also interesting with that is, unlike past generations where she might have been left behind, a step behind William to deal with the kids, it's always she's got one and he's got the other. And if one starts running off, William will go running after just as much as she will. And they're both very active co-parents. So it's not quite the traditional, she's wife and mother and he's future king and the lines don't mix. So she still will dress very professionally even when she does have the kids around. But it's not quite the same as, you know, when we would have seen Jackie with one kid in each hand and President Kennedy kind of off doing his thing. So we see them negotiating those roles a bit more. And Diana did the same. I mean, we've got pictures of her at Disneyland with the boys in just like a logo t-shirt and a leather jacket just hanging out. So they kind of know when to be professional and use that wardrobe and when to let their more personal side and casual side come out.
And then I guess just my last question. I felt like in the conclusion, you wanted to talk about, I might be wrong, but you wanted to talk about these women's desire to be taken seriously. And that sometimes when they can only get reporters to talk about their clothes, they're frustrated.
Yeah.
I guess I just want to hear you say more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Jacqueline is so remembered for her style, and a lot of Americans, especially younger generations, like my generation or younger, we remember her clothing, but it wasn't until I did this research that I realized how instrumental she was in the restoration of the White House. And that, I would say, is her true enduring legacy, but it's not as well known because everyone wanted to focus on her style. There have been a number of quotes that I've found, Michelle, I can tell that she probably got so tired over the course of 8+ years having every ladies magazine ask her about being a mom or being the first lady or what she was going to wear, and not asking her about, social issues and like being a lawyer and what's it like being a career woman and then having to take on this role. It's kind of like the whole hashtag around red carpet events, ask her more. They all kind of have that struggle, and they all have really amazing work that they're doing that goes far beyond what they wore and the style that they're known for. Catherine is hugely involved in mental health issues, particularly as it relates to young people and mothers. She's been open about struggling with issues related to depression and anxiety after she became a mother. We all know that Diana was a huge philanthropist, but again, like her thing that it always pops up. Every souvenir magazine you will find on Diana in London, in the tourist shops, there's always a huge section on her style, and the philanthropy kind of gets allotted a much smaller role. It's kind of her style, the divorce, and then her charity work. That was something that I wanted to do, and it relates back to the title, It's More Than a Pretty Dress. These women are more than just stylish women. They are women who have been involved in amazing causes and amazing work over the years, who have been good wives, good mothers, good family members in general. They've been amazing representatives of their countries. They've done just as important ambassadorial type work as any other dignitary representing their countries, and yet that's not what gets the focus. There's an exhibition going on right now in Texas at the George Bush Library that Laura Bush has been involved in, and the press pieces on that have been really interesting because while they do have clothing on display, they also have other artifacts from various first ladies, and they're really trying to push that it's more than their style. They need to be known for more than their style. And I agree with that, but I also think we can't just dismiss the style because the style is a huge part of how they've been able to do the work. So we can't completely divorce the two, but we also can't focus only on the style aspect. I think the biggest one that keeps popping up in my mind and in my research, and is something that I, as someone who's always been interested in fashion, have kind of dealt with, is this idea of clothing as oppression. And clothing as a form of oppression, kind of generally, but also that clothing, individual pieces, can be very oppressive and restricting and constricting. And all of these women are kind of from the post-corset era, but I'm sure there are feminists that look at Catherine's 4-inch, 5-inch platform heels and think, oh my God, no. I understand the critique, and I agree with the critique to a point, because I don't wear 5-inch platform heels. I find them very oppressive and constricting and make my feet hurt. But we've seen Catherine wear lower heels, so it seems like she is repeatedly going back to some of the higher heels because they work for her. She likes them. A lot of women say they like heels because it lifts their posture, they feel like they're taller, they have more power, a sense of something added. So it's a personal choice. And for me as a feminist, it is kind of about personal choice. If you're wearing the heels because you want to, then that's different from wearing them because someone is telling you you have to. I think when we look at Jacqueline, we probably do see more of that fashion as oppression. I don't think she had as much agency and as much space to navigate. She was still fairly limited in what she could wear. I think with Diana, it's kind of the same, but to a slightly lesser extent. And so we're seeing throughout the progression of time that oppression kind of changing and lifting and having more of that two-way negotiation with the woman. I feel like that argument of fashion as oppression, fashion as restriction is always going to be around. There will always be women and feminists who look at anything other than utilitarian style clothing as oppressive. I can't change that, but I think that that is sending a very clear message about your personal beliefs and your personal values, and that might work for some people, but it's not going to work for everyone. So expecting all women to reject fashionable dress doesn't really make sense, isn't really very feasible. And I do think that with these women, what we see is that while they are, I think I mentioned this in the dissertation, they do at times engage with the fashion system and the larger fashion industry, especially when they wear a designer gown to a state banquet or state dinner. They're not as in cahoots with it as celebrities are. And so we see them making more of those kind of normal choices, like the women that they represent in terms of this outfit. You know, Michelle could have worn something less covering that would be sexier and more fashionable, but she would have frozen to death on that day. So we see them making more of those negotiations. Yeah, I mean, with Jacqueline, even though she's being very proactive and she is making the decisions, there's still a heavy element of Jacqueline as First Lady and First Lady as ornament of the White House and as decoration and as an extension of the decoration of the White House. That we don't see as much with the other women, particularly with Michelle and Catherine and their huge amount of activism and their balancing of, I feel like Diana was constantly struggling and being pulled in different directions, wife, mother, princess, private person. Whereas with Michelle and Catherine, there seems to be more of a more fluid moving between the roles and an overlapping of the roles where, yes, Catherine is a mother. She's currently very pregnant with her third child, and she's still, up to just a couple weeks ago, was still working and going on public appearances and doing her job as a representative of the monarchy. But it was interesting, that last appearance, she's usually always wearing skirt suits or something. And that last one, she appeared in a pair of skinny fit trousers. And it was just, and she'd worn the same coat to two previous events, I think once previously with this pregnancy and a third time with one of the previous pregnancies. And both times she wore it with a dress or a skirt combo underneath. And so the juxtaposition of the more formal skirt dress options versus the more casual trousers, it's like she probably just woke up that day and didn't feel like putting on a dress, so she put on some of her maternity trousers. It's a very real choice, and so I see them kind of navigating those various personal roles with their public role a lot more than Jacqueline certainly would have had the ability to. I think she made the most of it that she could, and she took from that position as much power as she could, but she was definitely still bound by the social conventions and constructs of the time, being pre-second wave feminist. And her focus was definitely more on the public focus, but also I think her personal focus was more on being the dutiful wife and mother and first lady. And I think that's why there's such a stark shift after her White House years, during her marriage to Onassis, and then after his passing during the later years of her life as an editor in New York. Three very different and distinct styles, because she had very different and distinct roles. It puts personal style and personality, to a certain extent, ahead of official expectations and duty. And it gives agency and creative control to the woman rather than taking, or to the wearer, because this applies to men's fashion as well, rather than taking control of that away from them and dictating what their personal style and their public style and what their representation should be like, which then gives an interesting lesson to those who are receiving the style. And I think that also goes back to some of the feminist critiques where fashion has been used to put people in their place. And what I'm seeing is that the rhetorical significance of their style is they are deciding what their place is. As much as they can within the constraints of their official role. There are rules that they have to follow. But they're expanding that space, and they're moving around a bit more, and they're making more choices and having more control over that.
Okay, good, thank you. What would you anticipate the response to your study would be by those in rhetoric versus those in fashion?
I think in rhetoric it would depend on which area of rhetoric they're coming from, and if they see visual rhetoric and material rhetoric as having value, then I think this is a good contribution. Whereas if they're looking primarily at what words and speeches and books are these women known for, what lessons are they known for teaching, I feel like that's the battle that I've been fighting throughout all of these years in a rhetoric program, is to demonstrate how my work is significant within rhetoric, and that women's rhetoric, feminist rhetoric, material rhetoric are all very important and are needed because it says something about women. And when you look at, especially like Jackie, and then the progression, she made the most of what she could with the available means she had. And for her, that available means was largely what she wore and how she presented herself. With the more recent ones, we see them making more impassioned speeches. Diana talking about AIDS and things and landmines. We can see more of that more traditional rhetoric in action, but blended so seamlessly almost with the material and the women's ways of making type of rhetoric. The fashion side of things is interesting. I have definitely worked really hard, thanks to all of your comments, to go beyond the description that Wilson is kind of saying we need to move beyond. I think within fashion it's really easy to focus on the description, but it is necessary to move beyond that to look at the meanings of what clothing is. And even though I'm focusing on these 4 women, it really does get at how clothing functions and what clothing means on a broader, bigger level. So I've taken a zoomed in look at these 4, but my arguments would extend to any other woman in their position, as well as members of the public. And it's why I didn't choose, in very early versions of this project, I thought I was going to include some celebrities, some actresses. I was going to talk about Audrey Hepburn and Emma Watson. And I eventually realized that they operate in a very different way. And when we think about Audrey Hepburn as a fashion icon, I think her most iconic outfit is probably the Breakfast at Tiffany's dress. That wasn't her, that was a character in a film. And it was designed by a designer, not something that she had any say in constructing and creating. And Audrey's identity as a person, we've largely forgotten her philanthropic work, her charity work, the work that she did after she was an actor, because her iconic status is so connected to her clothing as an actor. Which I think is why Meghan Markle would be really interesting, because now she's crossing that line from celebrity and celebrity style into stateswoman style, and we're already seeing her making really interesting choices there. So I think the fashion scholarship and fashion theory is incredibly varied. You've got the people that focus on the description and just what clothing is and clothing history. And then you've got the people that focus more on clothing on a broad kind of social and cultural level and what clothing says about us as a society, as collective groups of individuals. But I really haven't come across many studies, just a handful within the material culture group, not the fashion theory group, that looks at individual women. So I would hope that, as Elizabeth Wilson was calling for, that this would be one of those new takes that brings together an interdisciplinary approach and looks at individual women, not just broad categories of women, which is why I look at the 4 and I didn't include, multiple. I didn't do a big group of stateswomen. I limited myself to just these 4 because there were a number of other women that I could have added. The most challenging? On a personal kind of scholar, researcher level, it was probably fighting that knee-jerk reaction to describe, and to really articulate and not assume that the reader would know why something was important, why something was significant. But on a more general level, I think the challenging part was, especially in the very beginning, was narrowing down to the women that I chose, making sure that I picked the right women and the right combination of women. I could have focused just on first ladies, I could have focused just on royals, making that decision and making sure that I was having a way to articulate why I was picking 2 royals and 2 first ladies. And just, I think it was a challenge in the beginning to get the study set up right, especially after so much time of writing a variation of this as a seminar paper and then having to expand that out to a dissertation, but still knowing what I would be studying and what I would specifically be looking at and how I would be looking at those things. Because I've got a Pinterest board that's like almost 5,000 images full of them, as well as supplementary boards of like oppositional images of them. There's a huge habit to Photoshop Diana's face onto celebrity bodies to show what she would be like if she were wearing traditional Hollywood red carpet pictures. They've also Photoshopped Catherine's face onto an old black and white picture of Queen Elizabeth. So this whole Photoshopping trend is really interesting. So I think in the beginning it was a huge challenge to keep it narrowed into something manageable because I kept seeing strands like the replicate community and the photoshopping and the oppositional and times that they do dress like each other. So I kept seeing this little like, ooh, sparkly, ooh, shiny, I want to go chase that, and I had to rein myself back in. So that was definitely a huge challenge in the beginning. Once I had that set, I could kind of put the blinders on, and then it became about not describing too much and having that analysis in there. But yeah, there was so much I could have done. Not exactly. In the traditional mainstream press, obviously in the really conservative press, there were a lot of people that didn't like Michelle. And I wasn't looking at that. I mean, I was just looking at how she was generally received by the mainstream press, by the mainstream fashion press, by fashion designers. And while I can't deny race is definitely there, I mean, we can't ignore it, it wasn't like this big elephant in the room that I had to confront in this project, but it's definitely something that needs to be talked about, which is why I think the next phase would be a project looking at how race, class, and gender intersect and work within stateswoman style. And looking at the backlash that Meghan has received, I think definitely indicates that this is a topic that needs to be talked about. But again, going back to the end of Maureen's last question, having to narrow it down, it felt like if I started to bring in race and class and gender, my fear was that if I started to do that, it would just be a surface level thing, and then that would open me up to a critique of you're not doing enough there. And I think that's a whole separate project. I think with Clinton, she deserves a book all her own. Because it is 3 different styles. Her style as First Lady, her style as Senator, and her style as presidential candidate. And though her style as a senator and as a presidential candidate are kind of similar, and there are some overlaps, there are also some differences. Because in one, she's got the job, she is a senator. In the other, she's trying to navigate and manage all of those perceptions. She's trying to be a woman, what a woman is supposed to be. She's also trying to be presidential and what we assume that is supposed to be. And so there's a lot more of that struggle going on. And so sometimes she fits in with the stateswoman genre, and other times she fits in with more of the political woman style genre. And when we look at how Theresa May or Angela Merkel, how some of these very prominent political women who have the power, who aren't, just connected to the power by marriage, but have it themselves, they dress very differently. That's a whole different genre of style because the clothing has to function differently. As a woman in a political power role, your clothing functions differently. So with Hillary, we see more of that evolution and that moving back and forth. And even within her stateswoman style as First Lady, there are times where you can see she's really fighting that. But she doesn't have, it's different from Michelle, but it's not like Jackie. And it's just, I feel like she struggled with it in the same way that Diana struggled with being the Princess of Wales and the dutiful wife to the future king and mother of the next future king. There wasn't a whole lot of middle ground for Diana, and I feel like Hillary kind of struggled to find a middle ground as well and was constantly pulled between either the more professional, powerful role or the very dutiful, subservient role. And I think that's what's interesting about Michelle and Catherine is they kind of have found that middle space. I mean, we could totally believe Michelle as a future presidential candidate one day. But there's something about her personality that's different from Clinton in a way. That's hard to explain and hard to articulate right now, not having done all the research, but that's just my gut instinct. I think for Diana, it's slightly different in that I think people forget that she was 19 when she got engaged. Catherine was 29 when she got married. I think Diana had just turned 20, or was like almost 20 at the time of the wedding, but she was still only 19 when they got engaged. And they'd only been together for a really short amount. Theirs was a very traditional courtship, whereas Catherine got to go through that kind of awkward teens and 20s years at university and kind of doing her own thing and being in this relationship, but then they broke up for a bit and we see her kind of going out with her friends and wearing whatever she wants and not trying to be that perfect potential wife of the crown prince kind of a thing. And Diana never really got that opportunity. So she struggled with a lot personally, kind of privately as well as publicly during those early years. And that's where we see her struggling a bit more with the tensions of what she should wear and how she should present herself, and not feeling as much support or understanding from the palace and from the royal family. Whereas by the time we get to Catherine, I think Catherine's more mature, she's learned more about herself, but the royal family is also more mature and have kind of learned from their past mistakes about how to try to control or micromanage the various members of the family. And so Catherine kind of benefits from the lessons that Diana learned as well as the lessons learned from Diana's time.